Have we got, are we still waiting for Dillon to get on the line?
No, Dillon is on the line.
Dillon is on the line. Fantastic. So
I know you were going to set up this interview, Jacob, and definitely don't want to steal your thunder there. But before you even get to that part, I did just want to give a brief reminder. Sometimes we get questions as to, why do we cover issues of like criminal justice reform, voting rights reform, those sort of things. What do they have to do with the labor movement and us as union members trying to advocate for union members and the working class more broadly? And I think, well, that's really the reason why, because we are here to support the working class. We think organizing in unions is certainly the first and foremost way we can do that. But we are all subjects of a government. We are all impacted by what this government does. And, certainly when you look at the balance of power in this society, especially for the past 4 decades or so, we've seen the power of working class people to shape the government has certainly declined tremendously.
Right.
And the representation of working people in government has declined, while the representation of our bosses and their allies has certainly increased. So I think that's where the connection lies, and I know that may sound obvious for some folks, but it's not for others. And there are folks who are very much kind of bread and butter. Let's talk about unions, let's talk about our wages and benefits, but they are connected, and I just felt it was important to say that out front before we get started with Dillon.
Yeah, they are. So I appreciate that, Adam. And Dillon, thank you for coming on. Dillon Nettles is the Policy and Advocacy Director of the Alabama ACLU. Dillon, thanks for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having me.
So the Alabama ACLU is tracking several bills that are going through the current legislative session. The session will have begun 2 weeks ago on Tuesday, January the 25th, and it ends on April 25th, 2022. So this is going to be an ongoing thing that we'll be updating the audience on as we go through the session. I want to talk to you about the Habitual Felony Offender Act, but first, can you tell us, as the session is now about a week and a half old, can you tell us if there has been any notable action taken so far in the session?
Great question. This has already been an interesting start to the 2022 regular session. So the legislature did convene on January 11th, which, as you mentioned, about 2 weeks ago. And almost immediately, we started hearing reports from legislative leadership that there was going to be a special session put on the table. Some of your listeners may be aware of this, but as a part of the American Rescue Plan, the state is going to be allocated ultimately more than $1 billion in funds. I think it's around $1.5 billion ultimately, right? The state had received last year already a portion of those funds. They'll receive later this year somewhere around the $700 to $800 million mark of the funds. And this governor has determined that there'll be a special session which started this week to allocate some of the remainder of those funds. And so we came in for a regular session, ball started kind of rolling, and then things have actually kind of gone on pause as the special session has now started. And we expect for that to be wrapped up by February and for a regular session to resume. And so some of these topics we'll be talking about today won't really see much activity until we get on the other side of the special session.
Interesting. Okay, so I misunderstood that announcement then, I think. When I heard that there was going to be a special session, I had assumed that the special session would be after the regular session, but the special session is just interrupting the regular session then.
Yeah, basically we're on pause for the regular session, and it will resume as the special session concludes.
I see. So is the regular session going to be extended because of the interruption by the special session?
So now we're getting into some tricky legislative procedure, but what I can tell you is constitutionally, Alabama's legislature can convene for up to 30 legislative days within the course of 105 calendar days. And so when the special session started, that count towards those 30 legislative days went effectively on pause. and the special session day count began. And so it won't necessarily be extended per se. We are not at this point actually counting days or checking days off in the regular session. But because it can extend over a 105-day period, then yes, essentially it could go past that April date that you originally shared before it concludes.
Okay. Gotcha. Well, I appreciate that clarification then. So let's talk about the Habitual Felony Offender Act. The ACLU is pushing for its repeal, but first, can you tell us what it does? What are the effects that this law has on working people in Alabama right now?
Absolutely. So I'm going to put this in really simple terms because I know the Habitual Felony Offender Act gets oftentimes bogged down in all of the legal, I think, minutia that's really hard for people to just kind of comprehend. I know it is even for me. The truth is that essentially what repeal, which is exactly what we're advocating for, repeal of the Habitual Felony Offender Act would do in Representative England's bill HB 57 is to give judiciary discretion back to the judges who originally sentenced folks for their habitual felony offender convicting offense to whatever charge that may have been, whatever they were convicted of. The judge gets an opportunity to take a second look essentially at that person after they have already served a lengthy sentence and say, maybe it's time to reconsider this sentence. Maybe it's time to reduce it or give them time served, right? Because they've had a spotless record while they've been incarcerated, or I see they've been involved in some programming, or frankly, our attitude towards maybe certain offenses or our understanding of why those offenses may have occurred have changed over the years. And so now a judge may be a little bit more lenient about that, or they may be reconsidering why they would, have charged or given someone a sentence for a certain charge years and years ago, right? And so they're saying, okay, let's give this a second look and make a decision based off of what we're seeing. And again, that would be a judge's decision. It wouldn't be us. It wouldn't be the parole board. It wouldn't be state legislators. It would be a judge's decision to be able to take a look back at that person's case and give them effectively a second chance.
And that's what, if we repealed it, then the judge would be able to give somebody a second chance.
Exactly. Now, currently what we're seeing happening is people are being sentenced to lengthy sentences. The Habitual Felony Offender Act is essentially a three-strike law, but it is outsized from any other three-strike laws that we see across the country. And so when this went into effect in the late 70s, we saw almost immediately an increase in the Alabama prison population, right? People were being sentenced to harsher penalties, which means that it was going to be a lot harder for them to ever get out if they ever do. And so with less people coming out and staying longer, then that population, of course, began to boom. And actually today, what we know is that most of the people sentenced under habitual and felony offender law are over the age of 50, and 3 out of 4 of those people are also Black. And so it also, of course, is disproportionately impacting a certain racial demographic, but also what we know is people who are over the age of 50 have really aged out of the demographic who is most likely to commit any criminal activity or even return to criminal activity. And so it's not even particularly logical from a public safety standpoint, but it's certainly not helping the deep issues that we also have with our overcrowded prisons.
Dillon, has anybody sponsored a bill to repeal the Habitual Felony Offender Act yet?
So Representative Chris England has sponsored HB 57, which is a bill actually he originally introduced, if I'm not mistaken, last year. And it was last year actually voted and passed through the House Judiciary Committee. And so there is some interest from lawmakers in this legislation. Of course, it wouldn't have gotten out of committee without bipartisan support. And so we're excited about it returning this year. It hasn't, had any action, of course, yet. As I mentioned, the ledge is slightly on pause in some ways for its regular session activity, but we expect that it will be back up as the session resumes in February, and we're excited to see where it gets.
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad that you have high hopes for for its passage. That's really good to hear. What about voting rights? That's another issue that y'all are tracking very closely, specifically voting rights restoration. Can you talk to us about that?
So the ACLU of Alabama has been really excited to work with partners from all across the state on this issue. About 2 years ago, we started getting together with other organizations and actually formed a statewide coalition called the Alabama Voting Rights Coalition. And one of the top priorities of that coalition, which is really diverse, includes a number of grassroots and statewide organizations that are already deep in the work of getting out people to vote and making sure people are educated about their voting rights, right? And so we got together and started thinking about our priorities, and rights restoration for people with felony convictions was high among those. I think that everyone knows right now voting rights is a part of the national conversation, and the attack on voting rights is something that we're absolutely defending. But the truth is that voter access has been long limited here in the state of Alabama, right? This has been a part of, unfortunately, our history and our tradition in this state is suppressing the right to vote. And that is absolutely the case here. We know that essentially what determines your right to vote in this state is your race, your financial status, and your criminal history or history of conviction, right? Mm-hmm. And so many people, especially when you conflate all of those things here in Alabama, are not even eligible to register to vote because they could be Black, indigent, and have a criminal history. And so what we are advocating for, and there's 2 bills that have been introduced to do just this, is to in fact ease that process for people to be able to get their voting rights restored, and to frankly not have to be bogged down with all of these financial penalties that we don't think should have anything to do with someone's ability to be able to show up and vote.
Right. So that's a big issue across the United States, having to pay for your right to vote. So first off, what are some of the criminal convictions that actually can make somebody lose their right to vote even after they get out of prison? In Alabama, you can't vote while you're in prison, but there are some crimes that even after you get out of prison, you've served your time, you still can't vote. What are some of the things that will keep people from voting?
Actually, it's quite a wide range. And so what I should say is there are penalties that are disqualifying forever. You still cannot get your rights restored. And those are a lot of Class A felonies. Those are what often people refer to as crimes of physical injury or crimes of violence, right? Those are your murder, your assault, things like that, right? But there's also
assault is a pretty big I mean, I know somebody that was convicted of felony assault, and like he was a super nice guy. Like he beat the crap out of somebody because they hurt someone that like he cared about, and so he went to prison and he has a felony assault charge on his record. I mean, that's assault is a pretty, a lot can be encompassed in that.
Absolutely. And that is one of those offenses that, again, those can be, and we are getting into first degree and second degree. Some of these things change when we get into some of the minutia, right? But assault in the first degree, murder, rape, some of these are going to be disqualifying until such time that they decide that those are also crimes of moral turpitude. But the crimes of moral turpitude are actually a list of things like drug convictions and property theft that are disqualifying. But right now in the state, if you were to be released from prison and have those disqualifying, those crimes of moral turpitude, you would go through what is a strenuous process, but you could start the process to get your voting rights restored. But you would have to go contact the Board of Pardons and Paroles, seek a SERB application, is what we call it, a certificate of eligibility, get that returned to you, fill it out, hope that you, in fact, don't have one of those completely ineligible convictions, wait 44 days for the Pardons and Paroles Board to respond to you, hoping once again that they actually are approving it. And then that's all before you even gotten registered to vote, got your voter ID, and gone out and gotten your information about where you've got to go vote and show up to at the polls. And so it is possible, right? We have those crimes of moral turpitude, which were passed in 2017, that says, yes, people in Alabama with some of these felony convictions can ultimately get their rights restored, but they've got to do all of this. Oh, and by the way, if you've got any restitution or fines and fees on your record, they're going to kick it out. They're not going to restore your right to vote, and you've got to pay that back before they do.
Yeah. Hey, Jacob, I wanted to jump in here real quick because I've looked at some of the resources ACLU has available for folks. If you are trying to assist people in your community to get their voting rights restored, ACLU does have resources to help you and that potential voter do that. But he's not exaggerating about how crazy the paperwork and just all the hoops you have to jump through. It's one of those where, technically on paper you can do it, but practically speaking, how many people actually ever make it to that finish line? And I'm really glad that y'all are bringing this part of the voting rights conversation up because, a lot of attention, I think, is focused on voter ID laws, polling place locations, things like that, which are absolutely important and do make differences. But when you're talking about a country with the highest incarceration rate on planet Earth, and a state in Alabama which has, one of the highest
than the national average,
right, one of the highest, so we literally put more people in cages in the state of Alabama than almost anywhere else.
I mean, we have more people in prison than the Soviet Union did with the gulags. During
the height of
during
Stalin
the height,
era.
I mean, so, and of course, I don't think that conservatives who love this law and order rhetoric would say that American citizens are worse than the commies in Russia, but our system treats them like that. So, you talked about what some of the things that they can get their right to vote revoked, and some of the hoops that they have to jump through to get it back, if they can get it back. And you said that there is a bill that has been sponsored, that has been filed to fix some of these issues. What does that bill do?
So there's actually two, which is really exciting. There's a House version and a Senate version, and those are HB 53 and SB 6, which are sponsored by Representative Laura Hall and Senator Coleman Madison, respectively. And those bills ease this process and remove a lot of those barriers. I've got to tell you, they essentially are saying, we believe that once you complete your sentence, complete your probation or parole, if that is also a requirement, then you shouldn't even have to go and seek out that serve application. There should be an automated, streamlined process that gets it to you, right? You should already know that, I got a serve application. I've got the ability to get my rights restored, right? I don't have a disqualifying offense. And so that means that I'm eligible, and be able to walk through that process, right? And there'll be actual resources in place for people to be able to get that application filled out. And then all they got to do is return it. And they should be able to, be returned with, say, a voter registration application. Right now, people are all on their own. And so what Senator Coleman Madison and Representative Hall are doing is saying, let's remove all of those barriers. Oh, and also, let's not make sure that paying these costs back is a requirement to be able to exercise your right to vote. And so they've got also some provisions in their bills that would allow people to work through a plan ultimately to perhaps pay those fines and fees back without having it be completed first before they're able to do so. They've also got an opportunity for you to do things like community service to kind of give you some credits back towards those penalties. And so I think, these are two really great bills that they've worked really hard with a lot of folks from across the state, people who are being directly impacted by this. And so we're excited to see where these go and what conversations they start. It won't be an easy road, but it will be an important conversation that we need to start now.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my next question, was its prospect for passage, because people that maybe don't follow state politics very closely, those two legislators that you named are Democrats, and the state legislature is controlled by a Republican supermajority. So you said that it was going to be a tough road. Has there been any Republican interest in these two bills so far?
tell you, actually, Senator Coleman Madison has toyed with this topic for the last few years. She's on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and she's been able to get some version of this actually out of committee in the past. Now, what we're actually doing is coming back and saying that we actually think we do need to go a bit further from the versions that we've seen in the past. They still did require far too many, they maintained far too many financial barriers, in my opinion. And so we have made some changes and are hoping that those who have supported the bills in the past will still continue to do so.
Well, I appreciate the updates, Dillon. There are several other issues that the Alabama ACLU is tracking. Where can people keep up with the work y'all are doing during this legislative session?
Please visit our website at aclualabama.org, and we have a Bill Watch page there where you can keep up with everything that we're opposing as well as what we're supporting. We've also got some incredible reporting from our investigative reporter, Beth Schulburn, about all of our criminal justice work over at alabamasmartjustice.org.
Dillon, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Work sucks, we know, but you can make it better by organizing with your fellow workers. For more information, call or text the Huntsville Industrial Workers of the World at 256-651-6707.